Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Our guest today, the one and only Ben Standig, of course, Commanders beat reporter for The Athletic. What's up, dude? Good to chat on the phone after seeing you in person today.
Yeah, I've retreated to the home front, cooling down a little bit, and trying to figure out what to write about today.
I was going to say, what's your biggest, always the million-dollar question, right? What's your biggest takeaway? Because I feel, Ben, like today was one of the more boring football practices I've covered in a while, and considering the intensity and tenseness of last year around this time with the sale pending and EB, coming in and just kind of the edge that everyone was on, to have like a nice, relaxed football practice in the middle or at the beginning of June is kind of what this time of year is supposed to be, and that's what it felt like. That was my biggest takeaway. What was yours today?
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I know everybody wants to hear, how does Jayden Daniels look and about some other guys, and I'm kind of like, I don't really know what this. It wasn't an action-packed session. I'm not exactly sure why that was the case. They were doing 11 on 11s a little bit. That was for the first time, and I don't know. I guess typically we're used to, because there's no tackling. The fireworks typically are coming if the offense is doing something, and it wasn't there. There wasn't a lot of highlights on that regard. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're also getting used to your point, of getting used to like what normal is. It's been so long that it's like, oh, we don't have to like have a, and not every single thing that's happening is like some big momentous deal. It's just a team going through practice, and I think they seem to be happy with where they were going. But yeah, not a lot to like take away, I would probably say, from the practice. So.
Right. None of it feels existential. And last year, everything felt existential. And part of that, I think, too, is probably because last year, like, even from a football sense, there's this massive question of, is Sam Howell going to basically save everybody's bacon? And this year, it's like, this is year one of Jayden Daniels, and there's a long runway ahead of us with all of these guys, from Jayden to Dan Quinn to Cliff Kingsbury to whatever. Like, the only way that it's not a long runway for maybe Cliff is if he does so well that he gets a head coaching job offer and takes it somewhere else. But I feel like part of this is just that there actually is like a long-term thinking, and it really is hard to have anything consequential come from any singular moment on such a long-term plan.
Right, and also last year, we had Eric Bieniemy, and this was his, first opportunity to really be the main play caller. He's controlling what they're doing in these sessions, so I think there's a lot there on that front as well. But yeah, I mean, there's a certain normalcy to what's going on. I do think they're being efficient. There was, I would say, there was more energy, more chatter than we saw at times in the past. I remember I said to somebody today on the sideline, we always used to notice when Montez Sweat and Chase Young were talking junk, because you could hear them, even if they were like across the field. And now I'm realizing that part of it wasn't just that they were doing that, it was quiet enough, relatively speaking, to hear them. And, now there's, Joe Witt Jr., the defensive coordinator, saying he wants a chatty defense. And just in general, I think these guys seem to be fairly engaged on both sides of the ball. So that stood out. But yes, I mean, it's not, in terms of what we're talking about, what we can see wasn't the most, fascinating time to be alive out there.
Ben Standig with us here on the Hoffman Show. I'm sure practice was not as clean as it seemed to us. That is the nature of it. And I'm sure if even with our level of expertise, Ben, if we got our hands on the film, we could probably find a mistake or two. That is it's the nature of watching a practice from the sideline. But what do you make of the fact that there doesn't seem to be any, or nearly as many, I should say, major mega mistakes this year with both how they're installing the offense, where there's not these big calamitous, like, oh, we got to run the play, start it over, or I don't feel like we've seen any major coverage busts on the defensive side either. What do you make of the lack of like the big one in terms of mistakes so far?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting that, First of all, defense typically is ahead of the offense, right? As we know, this time
Sure.
of the year, and even into early training camp. So I think we're seeing some of that come into play, and obviously everything is incredibly new. Not just Jayden Daniels, Marcus Mariota, obviously getting the majority of the other reps at quarterback, and they're still in some stage of learning the offense, their teammates, what's going on the other end of the field. I mentioned before this was the first 11 on 11, so now that's getting incorporated. Again, no tackling, but at least having the line, be a factor. So yeah, somebody was at one of the players we spoke with after practice. I don't remember who said, he was asked about Jayden Daniels. He was asked, has a play sort of stood out from him so far? And he mentioned the one from a couple weeks back where he threw a perfect shot down the right sideline to Jahan Dotson, and that was a really good play. But that was the one he cited. It wasn't something that happened 10 minutes earlier. It was something that happened a few weeks ago. Which again, it's not about Jayden Daniels. It's just to say, that's just kind of how practice went today.
Ben Standig with us here on the Hoffman Show. One of the guys that has definitely been at the center of things and the kind of turn of direction of the franchise on the field is Bobby Wagner. I know you wrote a piece about him in The Athletic. For those that haven't had a chance to read it yet, what's your favorite anecdote from the story and the favorite thing you learned about Bobby Wagner and what he's bringing to this otherwise, I won't say inexperienced, because there definitely are some guys with some, but certainly there are a lot of guys that are on Bobby's experience level league-wide, so I'll say less experienced defense around him.
Yeah, obviously we're talking about a guy who's a future, Hall of Famer, umpteen-time Pro Bowler and All-Pro and things like that. He's led the league in tackles, including just last year. So I had a chance to talk to Seahawks GM John Schneider recently about Wagner, and I'm like, so give me some type of thought when something that reflects to you what he's meant to your team and what it says about him as a player and what maybe Washington is going to get, et cetera. And you're thinking he's going to talk about his ability to call the defense and make such a sure tackler, or maybe he's going to talk about his locker room presence as a leader. And instead, he talked about Wagner's confidence. He's not arrogant at all, but just his confidence that showed. But he specified that because Wagner negotiates his own contracts, and he's doing it therefore against Schneider and their main contract guy. He pointed to that interaction as an example of who Wagner is as a person and his confidence, because he's really interested in the business and he's learning about that, and he's like, hey, I'm going to figure out how to do this. And yeah, he negotiated his own deals. I don't recall hearing people say Bobby Wagner got bad contracts. And I think it was just there's always a phrase, to be interesting, you've got to be interested. And for him to take on that challenge, meaning Wagner, I think something that for Schneider really stood out. Obviously, the playmaking itself, he was part of the Seattle teams that went to 2 Super Bowls and won one last decade, but that was interesting that of all the things he could have picked, that this guy's willingness to, negotiating a contract is hardball. It's not, it's not always, cut and dry what's going to happen. And then, that stood out to the GM of the team that drafted him. I just thought that was interesting.
No, that's really fascinating. Dan Morgan, the general manager of the Panthers, is a former middle linebacker who played with Carolina for a while until he actually had a neck injury, I believe. It was that caused him to retire. So there already is one current NFL general manager who is a former middle linebacker. Do you think that is in Bobby Wagner's future, or is this just kind of more of a personality quirk rather than a career pursuit? Or does Schneider think that?
Well, Wagner's already started his own entrepreneurial business, or at least he was a co-founder in one back in his Seattle days. So it looks like the business world may be part of his future. I know he had lunch the other day with Magic Johnson, because Magic Johnson tweeted out a photo of the two.
Yep.
And in the conversation, it wasn't just about joining the Commanders and helping this team, but it was also about learning. Magic's talking about helping him learn the ropes of the business world. So it may be more of that side of things as opposed to an NFL front office. But we'll see. I think at the end of the day, Wagner's going to have options in these various directions because he's, there are certain positions where athleticism and talent isn't enough, right? I mean, you have to really be able to read the room, so to speak, to understand what's going on out there even before it happens, to have good communication skills, and obviously middle linebacker is one of those spots, and I think that he's demonstrated that over and over again. And it's like it's one of the reasons why they wanted him. I mean, again, I think to me this is a bit of a rebuilding season to say the least. So it wouldn't be an obvious choice to go with an older linebacker, but they clearly were like, hey, we not only is he a good player, we want him to help set the tone to help these guys understand what it takes to win, and that's not something. Even for Hall of Famers, that's not something you would do with everybody. So I think this says a lot about how Dan Quinn and others view him and what Wagner has demonstrated in his career, beyond just being a talented player.
No doubt. A few more minutes quickly here with Ben Standig on the Hoffman Show. Ben, of course, the Commanders beat reporter for The Athletic. And Ben, I can't believe I haven't mentioned this in the show yet today because today, apparently, we didn't know this when we showed up, at least I didn't, marks the end of an era. At the end, I actually misspoke there on accident. I said error. It really was an error, but it's an era. That hideous turf field, field 4, if you will, in Ashburn. We get there today, and it's being torn up. So for those that have been out to the practice facility in Ashburn, there's 3 grass fields, and then there was an AstroTurf field, like true AstroTurf. It's concrete covered in carpet, and they have taken up the carpet and seemingly the concrete. Because Ben, we saw dirt underneath today. I feel like there's a million jokes to be made. I actually walked up to the Commanders PR people, the first people I saw, and was like, so where are the deer going to poop now? Because that's really what that field was for, seemingly, since 2015 and I got here. But what does this signify that the Commanders are continuing to make these kinds of upgrades, and specifically that useless piece of space is now going to actually become a practice field for them? Like, is this significant, or is it just kind of a fun little thing that's happening here that a lot of us are chuckling about because that turf field, no matter, even if you're John Keim, it feels like that turf field has been there your entire career covering that team, not being used for anything.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how significant it is in terms of their preparations for a season. I'm presuming they're going to put down another, grass field there and have it. They kind of can get by right now with the 3 that they have, but I'm sure obviously any opportunity to have it for different reasons could be valuable. It's even possible for the rest of the time that they're here in Ashburn that maybe they figure out a way to put, they're not going to upgrade the building at this point, but maybe there's a way to add, another part of, upgrade the facility by adding something there on the field. Maybe it's like an extra weight room or something along those lines. But I do think it's symbolic, though, if nothing else, because, for all the negatives that we talked about with Dan Snyder, and the list is long, I think one that got overlooked a bit was he basically just stopped spending on helping this team in any real way. One of the problems at FedEx Field is the age is not the issue. It's just that it wasn't taken care of. And that's why they've had so many issues. And similar here, this field could have been dug up at any time, but obviously it costs money, and I don't know how much it is, but it's it's a pretty significant job, and clearly at some point he decided he didn't want to spend on these types of things. So I think it's just another example of where however it's going to help the team incrementally or a big deal, Josh Harris is willing so far to show, hey, let's do what we need to do to make this thing better. Because he said it literally was just a waste of space. And now, again, whether it's another practice field or they find another way to use it to help the franchise, it's another sign of how Josh Harris is willing to do these things where it just wasn't getting done before.
Totally. And, as you said, they're not going to change the building at all, but they definitely are upgrading inside. There's tons of people, that, the business people, they've just kicked out of their offices and been like, you go work in College Park now. We need this for football. So I think, to me, Ben, the thing that it actually does signify, which is not new information, this is just another step, is that they are not going to settle with what they have because they're going to move soon. And whether that is the practice facility or the stadium, they're making massive investments in FedEx. They're making massive investments in Ashburn, and they refuse to settle and kind of take what would be a pretty easy route out and just be like, yeah, we're going to get you a new one soon. They want to maximize everything they're doing right now while also looking ahead towards the future. And I think that is something that, considering the last guy didn't even invest in anything, like the difference you're going to see is massive in terms of kind of the happiness of people to work there, but also it should translate to better results on the field because you can get better people and have them do better work.
Yeah, obviously we know there's a stadium that's going to be coming at some point, but it may not be until 2030, and there's nothing's been finalized yet, so we don't even know when it's going to be. Jayden Daniels is starting his career now. 2030, he has a 12-year career, right? That would be like half of his career. So just to simply stand idly by and say, well, we'll just wait before we do anything else with either what's going on in Ashburn or at FedEx or the old FedEx field, Commanders field.
Oh yeah, that place.
That would be that's literally kicking the can down the road. And if you're going to try to build this thing up, look, everybody who's reasonable understands that Josh Harris can only do so much with some of these facilities, but do something. And he is doing that, and hopefully that helps the team in preparation for games and the actual games or whatever else they have to do until they get the more modern facilities.
For sure. I have asked when they're going to put radio podcast studios in. I was told not imminently, but it's also not off the table. So who knows? Maybe the Hoffman Show and Standig Room Only could be from a facility out in Ashburn as well. So I'm just throwing that out there. Josh Harris and company, if you're listening, we'll take our shows on the road. Last but not least, though, Ben, you're such a big hoops fan. I'd be remiss if I did not ask. NBA Finals, who you got?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think both teams have their, all-star players. Luka Doncic, obviously, especially in that last series, showed people why he is arguably the best player in the game, or at least with him or Jokic. And Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, all they do is win, right? I mean, they haven't won the title, but they've continually had deep runs into the playoffs, and they got back to the finals again. I think it's going to probably come down to, unless Luka is just, the guy we saw in that last game against Minnesota for the whole series, I think it's going to come down to the role players. And I think for Dallas, if PJ Washington is hitting threes, assuming Boston's going to do whatever they can to slow down Luka and Kyrie, then I think if Dallas's role guys led by PJ Washington make shots, make the right plays, I think they get it done. So I'll go Dallas in 6.
Ooh.
Maybe I don't want the Celtics to win, but I'm going to go Dallas in 6. I promise I'm being a real analyst, I swear.
No, I hear you. It's so hard because Boston's clearly the best team, but I also kind of always just pick the best player in the series, and that's definitely Luka. So, but Tatum's close enough that it might come down to Boston's depth. So it's going to be a fun one. At least that's what we thought. Minnesota-Dallas would be fun too, and then the Mavericks kicked their ass. So who knows? Ben Standig, everybody. You can read him in The Athletic. Always appreciate you, sir, and I'll see you next week out for minicamp.
Awesome, man. See you then.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.